Boom! Boom! A loud rumble was heard, and Shinkai's huge body was sent flying. The pupils of many surrounding mighty ones constricted as they stared at the scene before them. Shinkai balked before the other two gave in. Wait, what? They thought. Futian basked in a divine glow at that moment. The power of the deed of thorough comprehension was brought to the maximum. Ancient symbols surrounded him, and he melded with the great path. His raging body itself seemed like the manifestation of the great path. Every single breath and every single step he took seemed to be that of the great path. Boom! He was shrouded in stars as he walked. Extremely brilliant light pulsed on the halberd of time and space, as if the might of the stars was all condensed into a single point, which was at the same time packed with condensed devastating power of space. Every single attack he lashed out with the halberd seemed to have been an upgrade from the attack before. Be it his spiritual willpower or the might of the great path, everything was amplified without exception. Shinkai let out a low rumble and took one hard, devastating step. The heaven-punishing fighting will seem to have coursed all over his life palace, shrouding the body of his god of war form. His eyes were ice-cold, and his killing intent reached the heavens as he glared at both Futian and Sheng. He was actually sent flying by the continuous attacks brought by both men before him. That was a true no-bars-hold battle. None of them suppressed their powers of the great path. The battle was able to showcase the extent of their powers better than in the peach banquet. Shinkai should have been able to overwhelm those two, who were of a lower plane than he was, without breaking a sweat. The power difference was deemed so vast that he was toying with Futian right from the start, thinking that he would have been able to make short work of them both. However, as the battle progressed, both Sheng and Futian fought increasingly hard and grew increasingly powerful. He was afforded no respite under the relentless attacks from both men. Rumbles were heard as terrifying demonic pressure loomed over them. Sheng was again the first who emerged to lay down suppressive attacks. Futian and Sheng seemed to have reached a certain consensus as they fought alongside each other, with Sheng pinning the opponent down while Futian landed the killing blow. Brum! Beams of extremely dazzling light burst from Shinkai's massive body. His spiritual will was cranked to the limit. His spiritual will took the form of one shadow of god of war after another, stacking right before him. Furthermore, the multiple layers of shadows waved at the same time. It was as if every single shadow was a clone of his own body. Every single shadow was imbued with the heaven-punishing fighting will. He then performed seals again. Many were shocked by what was happening right before their eyes. It was as if there were thousands of gods of war appearing at the same time, performing the mudra of god of war with their hands. His surroundings shook. It was as if the space around him itself was about to collapse. The seal of thousand gods. The mighty ones from the regional palace were shaking deep down when they saw what he was doing. They never expected Shinkai to be cornered until he needed to do that, bringing the seal of thousand gods, the ultimate technique of the mudra of god of war, to bear on his opponents. The attack was like the gods attacking all at the same time. Shinkai would have needed to crank his spiritual will to the limit to do so. There was no other way he could have used the seal of thousand gods otherwise. If that attack proved inadequate of killing, or at least severely injuring both Sheng and Futian, then Shinkai would have been the one in danger instead. There was a limit to how much of his spiritual will he was able to expend, after all. Attacks of such levels were not something that he could have brought out without care. The seal of thousand gods was activated. It was like the seals of all great paths in the world, unbreakable and nigh invincible. The attack was cast straight at Sheng, who was closing in fast. The seals were about to drown him, encompassing the entire space in his immediate vicinity. Sheng sensed the peerless pressure imbued within that attack. His eyes glittered with frightening light of the devil. An overbearing demonic will appeared. Like Shinkai, Sheng looked like he was surrounded by all devils to be found in the world. The devils all submitted to him, moving alongside him. The bat leaks, which was capable of shocking the gods, was brought down. Thousands of devils swung the axe at the same time, banging onto the bursting seals. Their surroundings seemed to be on the verge of collapse when both men clashed. The hearts of many spectators raced as they saw what was happening. The demonic Wulan Yusheng was completely on par with the heaven-punishing fighting while coursing on Xing Kai's body. Many wondered just how powerful the might of that demonic Wu would have been. They were wondering if Yusheng was actually a descendant of a devil himself. They wondered whose lineage he had inherited. Boom! A rumble was heard at that moment, pulling the attention of the spectators elsewhere, reminding them that other than Xing Kai, who was overwhelmingly imposing, and Yusheng, whose demonic might reach the heavens, there was still another man on the battlefield, Futian. Every single attack he brought forth was imbued with extremely refined killing power. His aura continued to climb as he moved, becoming increasingly powerful. The halberd in his hand pulsed with towering light. The power of the deed of thorough comprehension surged to the weapon. Boundless light of the divine halberd burst at the same time, causing his surroundings to howl. His feet twisted slightly, and he took another step. The great path in his immediate vicinity howled. That single step seemed to have brought his spiritual will to the limit. He flung his arms about, and brought the halberd of time and space down from above. Countless halberds tore through space, yet it seemed all the light had gathered into one single weapon. The weapon tore through the air, and came right before its target. Rumbles were heard exploding as the halberds hit the seals, which shattered right away. It was as if the seals were destroyed by the boundless light around the weapon. The spectators then witnessed a huge divine halberd that seemed to have torn through the heavens and penetrated the earth. The light of the halberd looked as if it had melded with Futian's body. All powers within his body surged into the weapon. The light bursting from the deed of thorough comprehension was all infused within the halberd. The attack seemed to be without an upper limit. The madras of God of War crumbled. The shadows conjured from Xing Kai's spiritual will were being destroyed one after another as well. The light of the halberd tore through everything as it headed straight for Xing Kai. There seemed to be nothing capable of stopping it. Xing Kai wore a startled expression. The shadows of gods of war on him gathered and charged. However, the attempt proved futile, as they were all penetrated right away. That one attack of the halberd tore right through every single bit of power of spiritual will he was able to muster. The distance between two men was utterly ignored, as the halberd headed straight for Xing Kai. It burst through. All those who witnessed the dazzling halberd attack seemed to be about to stop breathing. Time seemed to have stopped at that very moment. Xing Kai felt as if everything in the world slowed, including his thoughts and speed at counterattacks. It was unknown if it was he who had become slow, or it was just that attack coming too quickly. Boom! A loud rumble was heard. Many saw Xing Kai, whose shadows of gods of war seemed boundless, crumble. It was as if his spiritual will had suffered considerable damage as the constructs around him shattered. Yet another stifled rumble was heard. That huge divine halberd pierced the god of war's body. The light from Futian continued to surge into the weapon, making it look like an extension of his body. Rumbles continued to be heard as the tall, imposing body of the god of war crumbled. Xing Kai's true body appeared right before both of them. His god of war life spirit behind him continued to look extremely dazzling. However, his heaven-punishing fighting will seemed to have been almost exhausted, making him look rather shriveled. What was worse was that Futian's attack actually made it through, punching through his body. How could this possibly be? Xing Qiu, who was fighting far away, stopped fighting and looked at the scene feeling baffled. His brother Xing Kai was defeated in a real battle. Furthermore, he was defeated as a saint of true self, at the hands of Futian and Yusheng, who were both of lower plane than he was. All the other mighty ones looked at the scene with baffled eyes as well. Xing Kai, who was at saint of true self level, should not have lost, even if he were to take on two mighty ones. The difference in planes had never been something that could be compensated for number of opponents. A holiness of nirvana could have stood against dozens of unblemished saints without a doubt. But then again, that was if the difference in actual combat prowess was not all that far off. Well, was the actual combat prowess between Xing Kai and the other two Futian and Yusheng actually that far off? Xing Kai was someone who had been standing at the pinnacle. Following that line of thought, one could have easily figured out just how terrifying the actual combat prowess of both Futian and Yusheng were. That really is something. What kind of art of the halberd is this? Pei Min voiced his admiration. The weapon art that Yi Futian wielded was even more terrifying than Pei Min's art of the sword. That one attack was actually able to break through attacks as powerful as that from Xing Kai. And the man himself was hit by the weapon. Xing Kai's face was ashen at that moment. His robe and his hair billowed. His eyes remained glaring at Yi Futian, finding it hard to believe what had just happened. He actually lost. That battle was not a sparring session like back in the peach banquet. He did not hold back at all and fought in earnest. He had even brought the attack of the Seal of Thousand Gods to the fore. Yet he still lost nonetheless. He wanted to kill Yi Futian, as a way of showing his resolve. But things did not happen as planned. He grunted, and blood was seen at the corner of his mouth. His face looked pale. His mindfulness of the path was evidently cracked. None managed to make it through their training in the Great Path, without failing even once. However, he was unable to fathom why his defeat had been so humiliating. He lost to two who were of a lower plane than he was. Xing Kai was destined to be someone exceptional from the moment of birth. He inherited the heaven-punishing fighting will. And he knew right from the start the path that he was to take. It was destined that he was to become a Run Huang, one who would bring the glory of his ancestors back again. He was shouldering great responsibility, and he worked diligently towards that goal. He was not alone, as the ninth servant and the others around him worked hard as well. No one would have been able to stand in the way of their resolve and his destined path. Yi Futian, however, affected his path. Yi Futian was someone from Emperor Xia's realm, and was liked by the princess of said realm. He had also performed extraordinarily in the peach banquet. However, none of that mattered to Xing Kai. Yi Futian was deemed an obstacle, and as such needed to be killed. He was about to kill Yi Futian to prove his way and his resolve, enabling him to continue moving forward. His mindfulness of the path needed to be as indomitable as it had always been, and no one should have been able to shake it. Yet, that battle fought right after the banquet was breaking up his mindfulness of the path. Xing Kai began to have doubts at that moment. He was unable to even win against someone who was of a lower plane than he was. And that made him question how he was going to progress in his path of cultivation and reach the Runhuang plane. He doubted how he would be able to restore his ancestral glory and achieve unparalleled fame and might that was solely his. The battle on that day would have let everyone know that Xing Kai was inferior to Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. Blood continued to spill. And Yi Futian did not bother going easy while Xing Kai was steeped in those thoughts. The halberd pulsed with shredding will of the great path, as it tore through Xing Kai's body, intending to kill him right away. Xing Kai wanted to kill him first, so he saw no reason to hesitate. They were all in this predicament, so one of them had to die. The chance of killing Xing Kai presented itself, and Yi Futian saw no reason to let it slide. His eyes were filled with intense murderous intent at the moment as well. Devastating beams of light tore right through Xing Kai's body, intending to shred the man himself. However, extremely raging spiritual will burst from Xing Kai at the moment. The aura was incredibly vibrant, making Yi Futian feel as if his killing intent was being blocked. He looked at Xing Kai's eyes, which had changed. Those eyes looked tremendously deep and frightening. It was like they were about to tear right through Yi Futian's spiritual will. The ninth servant of the ancient imperial city was very, very mindful of the Xing brothers indeed. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Xing Kai's eyes became deep and terrifying. They looked a bit surprised as well. Xing Kai's eyes became deep and terrifying. They looked a bit surprised as well. The man before Xing Kai was not a top-notch figure at a very high plane. He was but a saint at proving holiness level. Yet, such a man managed to trigger the mark left in Xing Kai's body. Xing Qiu had almost ended up killed, and that triggered the mark in him. Xing Kai was unexpectedly the next one to experience that. The brothers lost one after another. Furthermore, the man who had defeated Xing Qiu was present on the battlefield as well. Xing Kai was probably out to seek vengeance for his little brother. Yet it was unexpected that he, too, had lost. The man behind the eyes watched the brothers grow up and knew what they were capable of. However, Both of them were defeated one after another by the two men standing before Xing Kai. After what happened in the last battle, he heard that Yi Futian, the young city lord of Qinya City, had opened up Emperor Kua's ruins. The young man then went on to subjugate the 9 tribes of the western region, putting the 9 tribes under the rule of one man again. The 9th servant realized that Xing Kai and Xing Qiu had indeed truly met their match. However, the 9th servant was hardly surprised. Having lived as long as he did, he had witnessed great battles between Renhuangs, and naturally knew just how abundant legendary figures were throughout the 3,000 realms. Despite Xing Kai's superbly gifted talents, as his training progressed, he would definitely run into some legendary figures. Furthermore, that event that was held not long ago would have been the Peach Banquet of the Crimson Dragon realm. The Peach Banquet attracted the most brilliant of figures to be found in all of Crimson Dragon realm, so it was natural that Xing Kai met his match. However, from the looks of things, Xing Kai seemed rather vexed, and he was adamant of getting rid of the threat. The 9th servant believed that the people from Qinya City did not dare to make a move against Xing Qiu, so it would not have been an exception this time as well. Furthermore, given that Gai Huang was around as well, Xing Kai would have been the one to make a move first, and he was defeated for it. An extremely brimming pressure shrouded Yi Futian. The 9th servant's will was impeccably strong. As a person standing at the pinnacle of holiness of Nirvana level, and the number 1 city lord outside of Crimson Dragon City, the burst of his will made Yi Futian feel as if he was withstanding pressures the size of mountains. Yi Futian's halberd of time and space was unable to move forward at all. Everyone turned to look at Yi Futian, and they all sensed the aura emanating from Xing Kai. All of them naturally knew that the will of the 9th servant was there. The man standing before Yi Futian was no longer Xing Kai. The battle between Xing Kai and Yi Futian and Yu Sheng was concluded. Xing Kai suffered an overwhelming defeat. The circumstances were so severe that his life was in danger, triggering the mark the 9th servant left inside his body. The 9th servant trained in a particular method called the Mudra of God of War. It was said that the phenomenon took place when Yu Sheng was about to kill Xing Qiu as well. The spectators found no difficulty making the connection. If such a mark was on Xing Qiu, it was only natural Xing Kai had it on him as well. However, no one expected that the humiliating defeat suffered by Xing Kai would trigger the mark. Many wondered if Xing Kai's state of mind would be able to tolerate such a result. His mind would have been affected after suffering defeat in the battle before. The blow would have been a hefty one. And then he needed to rely on the 9th servant's power to stay alive. To someone as prideful as Xing Kai, that was an insult like none other. It was especially so since he intended to kill Yi Futian to prove his resolve. However, that seemed to have dealt an even more substantial blow on him, making it more difficult for him to overcome the trauma resulted. The pressure that Yi Futian was withstanding grew increasingly intense. It was as if he was about to be crushed by that overwhelming power of will. "Senior." A voice was heard at that moment. Xing Kai turned his eyes around and looked at the one who talked. It was none other than Duan Wuji of Emperor Dong's palace, who had supposedly left yet had returned later. He looked at Xing Kai and smiled, saying, "I assume that you must be the city lord of ancient imperial city." Xing Kai seemed to be the one who picked the fight. "I think it'd prove rather unbecoming for you to throw your weight around after the loss. Don't you think?" The 9th servant was known to be the number 1 city lord. Other than the Run Huang of Crimson Dragon realm, the only ones capable of taking him on were none other than the few ranked at the top of regional king ranking. Furthermore, all of them seemed to have hailed from Crimson Dragon City. There were even old, terrifying monsters of people from the royal palace itself. As such, the 9th servant was known to be nigh invincible outside of Crimson Dragon City. Few were even able to stand up to him, in terms of powers. But then again, some would not have cared less. There were few training in the regional king palace. And then there was also Duan Wuji, who was training in the Emperor Dong's palace. He was, after all, a descendant of a native Run Huang in Crimson Dragon realm. No matter how powerful the 9th servant was, he could not beat a Run Huang. Furthermore, it was not one from somewhere outside the realm, but one who was from the Crimson Dragon realm itself. The ninth servant looked at Duan Wuji of Emperor Dong's palace and said, "The feud between the ancient imperial city and Qianya city has nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace." It indeed has nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace. However, this is Crimson Dragon City. It was totally fine for Xing Kai to ask for a rematch after losing to Yi Futian in the Peach Banquet. But then again, I assume that you, Senior, as a city lord of ancient imperial city, are not going to kill Yi Futian in Crimson Dragon City, no? Duan Wuji smiled and added, "That would be difficult to explain to the royal palace, wouldn't it?" The ninth servant frowned. "Senior, the battle was indeed started by Xing Kai. Even if the royal palace were to turn a blind eye to you bullying a junior, the city lord of Qianya City is still someone from Emperor Xia's realm. If Emperor Xia himself makes a move, I'm sure the royal palace would be even more reluctant to get involved." Yet another voice was heard. The one who spoke was Pei Min, who trained in the regional palace just like Xing Kai. While he trained in the regional palace just like Xing Kai, Yu Sheng, and the others, Pei Min never fought any of them, and was not all that familiar with them. He too had no beef with any of them. As such, he had no cause to speak on such a matter. However, he was still able to tell right from wrong. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng performed admirably and peerlessly in the Peach Banquet, overwhelming Xing Kai. Xing Kai then asked for to spar so that he could kill Yi Futian. That was personal. However, since he made his move, he had to accept whatever the outcome was. Having his old man show up right after he lost to fight his opponent would be quite disgraceful after all. If Xing Kai were to agree deep down, then Pei Min would have looked down on that so-called top-notch genius training in the regional palace. He would not have cared in the least if Xing Kai was not fine with his opinion. Xia Qingyuan shot from the sky. Her eyes were cold. That was the second time the ninth servant appeared. That number one figure outside of Crimson Dragon City was someone that none could threaten. It was probably due to the presence of the ninth servant that both Xing Kai and Xing Qiu were able to act so impudently. Regardless of how much of a genius one was, or how prideful they were, someone without serious backing, and with such an attitude would have died many times over. The ninth servant then turned his eyes to Pei Min. He never expected the defeat would have put Xing Kai in such an unpopular spot. All of that would be a severe blow to Xing Kai. His eyes softened as he looked at Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. He was able to understand why Xing Kai chose to do what he did. Those two from Qianya City would probably become Xing Kai's inner demons, so he wanted to get rid of them. If Xing Kai were to leave them be, his path from here on out would probably be overshadowed by those two. He found such a turn of events unacceptable, and chose to cut them down right there, and then instead. Even though Xing Kai would have found such an outcome to be difficult to stomach, he would have been able to overcome it in time. He needed to be decisive when the time called for it. If he was unable to bring himself to do so, then he was the problem instead. At that thought, the ninth servant's eyes became imbued with killing intent, which was then infused into his will. It continued to bear on Yi Futian. Yi Futian was able to sense the killing intent within. Return. The killing intent lasted only for a split second. No one else other than Yi Futian would have been able to sense it. Furthermore, the ninth servant seemed to have heeded the words of Duan Wuji and Pei Min, getting ready to return. He had no intention of making a move against Yi Futian any further. That split second prior made Yi Futian realize that the ninth servant did not intend just to let everything slide. It was clear that he did not want to make a move in Crimson Dragon City, to avoid getting on the bad side of Crimson Dragon Emperor and offending the royal palace. He would have been unstoppable outside of Crimson Dragon City instead. The sparring has yet to end, and you're about to return? A low voice is heard, and everyone was stunned as they heard those words. Everyone turned around to find that the one who spoke was none other than Yi Futian. The light of deed of thorough comprehension burst to its limit on Yi Futian's body at the moment. Terrifying aura surged from within his body, shrouding his entire being. Return? Yi Futian thought incredulously. The ninth servant was getting ready to leave. And yet, Yi Futian did not intend for things to end just like that. You think you can just come threaten to kill him and leave when you're unable to do so? Do you think you can take me on once we all leave Crimson Dragon City? What the hell? Many turned to look at Yi Futian and wondered what he was trying to do. They were wondering if he had intended to end Xingkai right there and then. If that were the case, the ninth servant would not let things slide. Everyone in Crimson Dragon Realm knew that the Xing brothers were the embodiment of the ninth servant's mission in life. He would not have allowed anyone to harm Xingkai, let alone killing the younger man. Holy flames burned as the light from the deed of thorough comprehension burst. The weather changed, and Yi Futian's eyes seemed to have become flames. It was as if a terrifying will was shooting out of his eyes. His body was bursting with powers that did not belong to him. He is still able to tap into the power of Emperor Qua? The hearts of many raced. All of them thought that Yi Futian had paid a hefty toll in that battle before. Many thought that there was no way he could have sustained fighting like that. The recoil would have been extreme, and it would have possibly ended up taking his life. Many speculated that he would have probably died from the recoil of that battle a while ago. However, he once again stood before everyone. But then again, that battle is still very much a recent thing. Is he trying to pull what he did before again? They wondered. Yi Futian's body rumbled, and the flames of the Wei in his body became extremely hot. That fire spirit orb in his life palace unleashed its power, tainting the skies red within an instant, making the place look like a world of fire. However, Yi Futian was actually doing his best to control it. The outcome was not something he would have been able to sustain easily, so he did his best to limit the release of such powers. While the ninth servant was there, it was nonetheless just an effect of the Madra of God of War in Xingkai. It was not that the ninth servant showed up in person. He wondered just how powerful that mark would have allowed the ninth servant's powers to be. He thrust the halberd of time and space straight at Xingkai. The weapon pulsed with terrifying light of flames. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. All eyes were on to that towering might. Countless nearby turned their eyes to the battlefield, feeling rattled deep down. All eyes were on to that towering might. Countless nearby turned their eyes to the battlefield, feeling rattled deep down. It was Xingkai who wanted to kill Yi Futian, before to prove his resolve, due to what happened in the peach banquet. However, he lost to Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. Things were different at the moment. Yi Futian became the one out to kill Xingkai, going as far as to want to kill him despite the will of the ninth servant, giving Xingkai an advantage. Everyone present knew just how powerful Yi Futian had become after tapping into those powers back in the battle at Qinya City a while ago. He had been able to overpower a good number of holiness of nirvanas. There were several such figures rendered dead by his hands. Things were so severe that the Saint Lord of Juyang dared not touch him, and even the likes of Gai Huang had not been able to do anything about him. Everyone wondered how much of that power Yi Futian was planning on tapping into, and if he could have performed as he had in that battle a while ago. They were also wondering just how powerful the special mark the ninth servant placed onto Xingkai was. If the ninth servant had indeed shown up personally, there was no need for further speculations. Even if he were to bring the full power of Emperor Qua to bear, like how he did in that battle before, he was still borrowing someone else's power. That would not be enough to deal with someone like the ninth servant, who was at the pinnacle of holiness of nirvana level. The ninth servant, however, was only doing battle remotely through the use of that mark in Xingkai, and through the younger man. There was no way he could have brought all of his might to bear on Yi Futian. The halberd of time and space contained extreme might of flames. The spirit orb inside Yi Futian's body seemed to have channeled all of its will of the great path into the weapon. Terrifying whirlpool of flames appeared in their surroundings, gushing into the halberd in a frenzy, causing it to burn. It turned into a tremendously divine halberd of time and space imbued in flames. The fearsome weapon was thrust right at Xingkai's throat. Yi Futian's fiery eyes were extremely cold instead, with his killing intent scorching hot in the fires burning in him. A figure stood tall above the palace at the ancient imperial city. His aura was towering, gushing outwards, and shrouding his surroundings. The vast ancient imperial city seemed to have been shrouded altogether by that towering might. Everyone near the city lord's office of ancient imperial city was shuddering deep down. They were all wondering what was happening. They looked up at the pinnacle of ancient imperial city. They were able to see the ninth servant hovering in midair vaguely. His gaze was cast far away, and his will gushed in a frenzy, shooting out at a distant place. The ninth servant's robe billowed, and his overpowering might looked extremely fearsome. It was as if he was like a god himself. Furthermore, the ninth servant was filled with intense killing intent. Futian of Qinya City intended to kill Xing Kai right before his eyes. As the protector of the descendants of Emperor Zhan, the meaning of his existence was none other to watch them grow, witnessing them eventually surpass him to step into that legendary plane, achieving the former glory of Emperor Zhan of the past. There was no way he could have watched Xing Kai and Xing Qiu get killed. He absolutely would not allow anyone to kill them. He was not about to let anyone threaten the Xing brothers' lives. Anyone who did so, he would make sure to kill them. Futian is thinking that he can kill Xing Kai just by tapping into the will of Emperor Qua. Then, the ninth servant thought. He has no idea what the significance of the mudra of God of War is, he thought. The ninth servant lifted his arm and pointed his finger in front of him. The place right before him trembled as if that finger was penetrating it. At the same time, Xing Kai, who was far away in Crimson Dragon City, lifted his arm as well, pointing a finger before him. There seemed to be a shadow manifesting from Xing Kai's body in that instant, which did not seem to be his own. Futian seemed to have been able to see yet another figure far, far away through that shadow. The shadow of that legendary figure, who was standing at the top of ancient imperial city. That finger attack was not brought forth by Xing Kai, but by that man represented whose shadow. That finger attack seemed to have imbued the great path of the world around them, which was gathered at a single point, and pointed at the halberd of time and space. The fact that he was taking on one such weapon, with only a finger, spoke volumes of his tremendous confidence. The clash between the finger and the weapon seemed to create a terrifying, dark whirlpool, twisting the great path. It swallowed everything in its immediate vicinity. The will of flame shot at the finger with the intent to burn everything down. Yet at the same time, Futian felt his arm tremble quite a bit. It was as if he was losing his grip on the halberd. That immensely heavy power burst through, trying to wreck Futian's body through the weapon. A grunt was heard, and Futian was sent flying. A stifling rumble burst from the place the attacks clashed, with a terrifying whirlpool out to destroy everything remaining. Flames engulfed Xing Kai's finger. It was like it had been scorched. A great will of the great path then enveloped the finger, repairing the damaged parts. It was apparent that both men were tapping into powers that were not theirs, and it was also apparent that their attacks were defective, as both of them lacked the strength to master such powers. Futian, who was boosting his physical constitution by tapping into powers of others, was unable to withstand that one attack the ninth servant brought forth, which was evident from the fact that the ninth servant was still able to hurt him through the halberd. Futian might have tapped into the powers of Emperor Qua, but he still was not Emperor Qua. He was still a saint at proving holiness level. Furthermore, he did not tap into those powers completely. He was doing his best to keep himself from biting off more than he could chew, being concerned about the magnitude of recoil he would suffer. Xing Kai faced Futian. At that moment, Futian felt as if it was the ninth servant at the ancient imperial city, who was watching him from afar. That overbearing aura was unshakable. It was not something he could have managed to shake off. That man was at the pinnacle right below Renhuang Plain, and a holiness of nirvana ranked high on the regional king rankings. He managed to bring out his true might simply by borrowing Xing Kai's body. Futian wondered what kind of powers they had. Regardless of the methods used, there was no doubt that it would take quite a hefty toll on the ninth servant for being able to go so far. At that moment, Futian saw Xing Kai beginning to grab at the air. The great path of their surroundings churned in a frenzy. It was as if the space he was in was isolated altogether. Boundless will of the great path bore onto Futian. It was as if countless hands of victory were manifested in the air, enveloping the space around them. The might of a holiness of nirvana. Everyone around them shook tremendously deep down. Those were powers from the ninth servant himself. Even if he was not physically present, he was still able to use his powers remotely. The spectators looked at that battlefield, finding Yi Futian's body shrouded by the will of the Great Path. The space surrounding them seemed to have been isolated by that will of the Great Path, forbidding anyone else from stepping in. That space was put on lockdown, trying to kill Yi Futian inside. Yi Futian clutched the halberd of time and space tightly. His body seemed to have been burned red. The place around him was still burning, and a tall, imposing god of war of flames appeared. He glared at the figure before him, and the fires seen his eyes seemed able to burn space itself down. Boom! The flames of the Great Path burst, and Yi Futian trembled, looking rather pained, yet his eyes remained adamant. The killing intent on the ninth servant at ancient imperial city burned even brighter. After seeing Yi Futian's eyes, the ninth servant vaguely realized why Xing Kai would lose. He extended his hand and grabbed tightly. In that instant, the palms of the Great Path surrounding Yi Futian rained down in a frenzy. Their surroundings shook, intending to bury that space. Furthermore, every single attack from the hands was incredibly intense. All of them tore through space and landed hard on Yi Futian's body. There would have been no way he could have sustained even a single hit, even if he had a body of a saint. Due to him still being a saint at proving holiness level, the attacks would have killed him right there and then. Yi Futian's body seemed to have transformed into a sun amidst the terrifying attacks. Rays of sunlight shot forth, looking just like the sun that Yi Futian saw in the ruins of Emperor Kwa on that day. Terrifying light of the sun shrouded everything within his immediate vicinity, shooting at the attacks from the hands around him. The attacks rumbled and intended to continue moving on to kill Yi Futian, yet they were gradually melted down to nothingness, and they were then punched through by the divine light of the sun. Yi Futian basked in boundless holy fire under the intense light, as if he was a god of war of the sun. He stepped forth and blitzed, bringing the might of the holy fire of the sun to bear. The halberd itself seemed like it was burning. The light of the flames punched through everything as the attack was underway, heading straight for Xing Kai's body. The ninth servant saw him coming, and took one step forward. A golden divine wall appeared right before him, which looked like a divine seal of the Great Path, howling as it headed towards its target. The halberd and the seal clashed. The resulting force made it seem like the space was about to be torn apart, yet the seal was gobbled by the flames, burning a hole through it. A flash of the halberd was seen through the seal. The ninth servant lifted his arm and banged onto the weapon, retreating as he did so. A ray of terrifying light pulsed on the halberd as it continued to move forward, shooting at Xing Kai. Yi Futian's god of war of flames form was sent reeling as well. His body rattled intensely, and blood was seen at the corner of his mouth, which was instantly dried up by the flames around him. Retreat! A voice was heard. The ninth servant said this as he was seen retreating. The mighty ones from ancient imperial city retreated one after another. Gai Huang threw a palm attack. The light of space glittered, and he retreated as well, with Xing Qiu and the others in tow. Shen Tianzhan and Wu Yong stepped forward, glaring at the ones who left coldly. However, none of them gave chase, and they went up to Yi Futian instead. Let's head home. The aura on Yi Futian gradually subsided. He turned around and left where he was. While he had not used his full power in that battle, he was thoroughly exhausted. The injuries on him were just as grievous. However, he was sure that the ninth servant was having a hard time as well. He was borrowing Xing Kai's body to do battle, after all, and that would have caused severe limitations. The people of Qinya City retreated in another direction. Countless in that place watched all of them left. Their minds were still reeling somewhat from what they saw. If the ninth servant had not appeared, Yi Futian would have most probably killed Xing Kai. Furthermore, even after the ninth servant advent, Yi Futian remained adamant about killing his opponent. However, the ninth servant was too powerful. Despite fighting through the use of the Mudra of God of War, it still looked as if he had been present personally, bringing holiness of nirvana level of powers to bear. The conflict between both sides would intensify after that battle. Worse still, none of them needed to hold back after leaving Crimson Dragon City. It seemed that a furious storm was brewing. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian went to train in isolation as soon as he returned to Qinya City. The mighty ones staying in the city lord's office all got busy as well. Xia Qingyuan ordered some men to head to the 9 tribes in the western region of Crimson Dragon Realm, getting ready to gather the mighty ones from those tribes. Yi Futian went to train in isolation as soon as he returned to Qinya City. The mighty ones staying in the city lord's office all got busy as well. Xia Qingyuan ordered some men to head to the 9 tribes in the western region of Crimson Dragon Realm, getting ready to gather the mighty ones from those tribes. Ancient Imperial City and Qinya City had butted heads in that battle in Crimson Dragon City, officially making them enemies. The 2 city lords had been involved in the conflict, with the 9th servant borrowing Xingkai's body to fight Yi Futian. The battle meant that the 2 strongest cities other than Crimson Dragon City had declared war on each other. Under such circumstances, Qinya City had to put all its effort into getting ready for war. While their opponents this time were only from one city instead of an entire region or a realm, it seemed that they were still at a disadvantage compared to their past battles. In the world of cultivators, a figure who was truly at the pinnacle of a plane symbolized far more than what could be measured through sheer numbers alone. The threat from the 9th servant, who was known as the number 1 figure outside of Crimson Dragon City, posed a far greater threat alone than all of the mighty figures from past conflicts combined. The people of Qinya City had to get ready for war under these circumstances. The news of what had happened at the Peach Banquet and the battle in Crimson Dragon City spread far and wide soon enough. The names of Yi Futian and Yu Sheng became known throughout Crimson Dragon Realm. Countless people were talking about them. Those 2 men from Qinya City had exhibited tremendous talents and combat prowess in that one battle. Even if one were to judge from their performance in the Peach Banquet, they had ruled over everyone else then too. Xingkai had probably gotten jealous of all the glory he was supposedly robbed of, which made him want to kill Yi Futian. The future of Qinya City might turn incredibly grim. As city lord of Qinya City, Yi Futian's powers became known to all. He became the master of the 9 tribes left behind by Emperor Qua, uniting them all under one banner. He'd also inherited the lineage of Emperor Qua. Xia Qingyuan, princess of Emperor Xia's realm, seemed to have paid close attention to him in those 2 battles, witnessing how he'd tapped into powers that were not his. All of that, coupled with what had happened at the Peach Banquet, made it certain that if the city lord of Qinya City could make it out of the altercation with ancient Imperial City in one piece, his success in the future would be immeasurable. As had been expected by many, more news came after that. News from the regional palace said that Yi Futian was to be ranked on the regional king rankings. Furthermore, there was no waiting. An exception had been made, and he was being ranked without due process. With the talent and combat prowess he'd showcased at the Peach Banquet and the battle in Crimson Dragon City, there was no doubt that he would make it into the rankings. He'd managed to overwhelm many legendary figures who were ranked on the regional king rankings, as well as defeat Xingkai, who was a saint of true self, by joining hands with Yu Sheng, forcing the 9th servant to save Xingkai. There was little need to elaborate on the significance of that battle. The difference in planes was obvious, yet the 2 had been able to bridge the gap and defeat Xingkai. If all 3 of them had been on the same plane, both Yu Sheng and Yi Futian would have probably been able to defeat Xingkai on their own. Xingkai was already quite a legend. He was ranked on the regional king rankings. As such, it was only natural for Yi Futian to be ranked as well. However, Yi Futian did not know about anything going on in the outside world at that moment. He had been training in isolation in the city lord's office ever since he'd returned. Yi Futian was sitting cross-legged in a sealed-off training ground. The jade-green leaves and branches of the world tree enveloped him. The will of life coursed through him, repairing any damages his body had sustained. While he had not been going all out in terms of tapping into foreign powers during that battle in Crimson Dragon City, he had nonetheless activated the fire spirit orb in his life palace, wielding combat prowess exceeding his own plane. As such, it was only natural that his body had taken a huge toll from the action, requiring a certain amount of time to recuperate. Fortunately, Yi Futian's special constitution was one that was capable of self-repair. Furthermore, His physical constitution had always been extremely strong, meaning that the extent of the injuries he'd sustained was not particularly concerning. At the moment he was steeped in training, the injuries on both the outside and the inside of his body were being repaired. The scenery within his life palace, on the other hand, was something else altogether. A figure conjured by will appeared within the world in his life palace, training and digesting what had been learned. He'd gained quite a lot of knowledge from the peach banquet. While he couldn't use the magic zither at the moment, the 1,000-character proverb and starry steel nonetheless proved extremely useful. He had to devote some time to digest them, melding what he'd learned with his existing powers. Be it the 1,000-character proverb or the starry steel, both of them were Runhuang-class ways of learning, which would enhance his combat prowess a great deal. Furthermore, both abilities were different from one another, and were even able to complement each other, melding into a single entity and creating even greater power. Ancient symbols circled Futian. The symbols resonated with the surrounding Great Path. Every symbol contained powers of the Great Path, which were then imbued within his will. Any of the symbols contained the extremely powerful aura of the Great Path. Training with the 1,000-character proverb did not allow him to wield his complete powers in combat, due to the limitations of his current plane. He was only able to get the symbols ready prior. Such a method of fighting was akin to burning through consumables. However, the powers of the Great Path that were brought about when the symbols attacked were worth comprehending. If his comprehension was profound enough, he would be able to harness such powers at any given moment. He speculated that he would need to get near the Runhuang plane before he would be able to bring the powers of the 1,000-character proverb to bear at will. Doing so would practically allow him to wrap powers in symbols and get the powers of the Great Path to burst whenever a symbol appeared in his mind. The offensive techniques on the starry steel shared some similarities with the one on the 1,000-character proverb, yet there were differences nonetheless. Celine saw most of what it was able to do on the divine martial road. It was truly a tablet of the Great Path that was able to summon the stars, overwhelming everything before it. That was probably not something saints were capable of doing, making it so that he needed to take his time to comprehend and train. The inherent powers of Runhuang-level methods were naturally things that no one at the Saint Plane was able to fully access after all. After training for some time, the shadow conjured by his will arose. A staff appeared in his hand, and he began to work on his staff techniques. His moves with the staff did not have any earth-shattering force in them, yet every single stroke contained the power of the Great Path. The moves melded well with the Great Path itself. The 9 heavenly attacks were something that he had acquired from close observation. After training with them for many years, they were no longer just the moves that had been imparted to him by the snow ape anymore. The moves themselves had been incorporated with all that he'd come to understand over his years of training. The moves were ever-changing. While the move sets might not be as powerful as those wielded by the snow ape all those years ago, the sets were nonetheless the most suitable for his use in his current state. Rumbles were heard within his life palace. Futian stopped after working with the staff for some time. He then moved on to train with his halberd. The move sets with the halberd were something he'd created himself, using references from the 9 heavenly strikes and many other methods. This helped to complete his way with the halberd. One could see the training methods of the staff in the way he moved with the halberd, yet his way of wielding the halberd remained different nonetheless. His way with the staff was fierce and overbearing, while his way with the halberd looked to be imbued with a sharpness capable of tearing anything down. The similarities between the two were that they were both very offensive-focused. This similarity strengthened as he went on to complete them. The battle he'd fought with Xing Kai in Crimson Dragon City had brought his way of the halberd to the very extreme. Each strike grew stronger than the strike before, making it so that Xing Kai was no longer able to withstand his blows. Futian, who was still working in his life palace, continued to play around with the halberd. The force of his moves was natural, and continued to grow stronger, as the will of the Great Path imbued within. He then thrust with the weapon. The air around him shook, and then stopped altogether. He stood quietly, seemingly having developed something. He repeated the moves several times, as if he was trying to grasp something, which was proving difficult. He finally stopped and resorted to thinking quietly instead. Yi Futian's eyes opened in the quiet training ground. He stood up and extended his hand. A halberd appeared in his hand immediately. Raging currents howled around his body as he stepped forward. His arms went into action and moved forward, thrusting the weapon out right before him. Boom! A stifling rumble was heard. Terrifying, space-shredding powers were felt right in front of the halberd. It contained the heaviness of the stars and overwhelmed the entire place. Something is not right, Yi Futian muttered to himself. He was still unable to find the feeling he was looking for. He sidestepped and moved his body forward as he lashed out with another thrust with his arms. It looked as if the powerful will of the Great Path was all being condensed into a single point, forming a devastating whirlpool. Yi Futian looked as if he was in trance afterward, repeating the moves over and over. He did this so many times that he seemed to have forgotten about his injuries altogether. After many attempts at the attacks, the deed of thorough comprehension activated without him realizing it. The will of the Great Path flowed within the cauldron of the Great Path of his body. The force burst through the halberd, growing increasingly powerful. Slivers of holy light shrouded his entire body. He thrust yet another time. At that moment, a beam of dazzling light burst through the air, lashing out like a straight line. Boom! A rumble was heard as the space around him crumbled. The matrix isolating the training ground shattered in an instant, as if it had been reduced to nothing in a split second. Yi Futian finally stopped. He looked at the halberd in his hand and reached out to sense the power he felt. He extended his left hand. A powerful aura emanated from it. Dazzling beams, calamity and lightning glittered, shooting out far away. At that moment, every single bolt of lightning burst like thunder as they shot forward, tearing down every single thing they crossed. That will of the Great Path seemed to be everywhere in the sky. Yi Futian looked up at the sky and saw something joyful. He had unexpectedly developed yet another mystical will of the Great Path, while trying to train with the mystical methods he'd learned. The new will was something that was not of his own. That will of the Great Path contained powerful space-tearing powers. At the same time, it was imbued with very frightening powers of the stars and suppressing powers. The force that burst from the attack could have been considered a product of melding several of the powerful wills of the Great Path. Entropy, Yi Futian muttered to himself. The will of the Great Path was named entropy, which was an offensive power. Such will of the Great Path would enhance every attack it was imbued with, making them overwhelming and fearsome. One attack was all it would take to reduce everything to nothing. Yi Futian glittered with holy light after he developed the new will of the Great Path. The light from the deed of thorough comprehension became even more blindingly brilliant. His aura had also strengthened, melding naturally with the Great Path. His comprehension of the Great Path had deepened. He had reached the pinnacle of proving holiness level without even realizing it. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. A group of mighty figures arrived at the city lord's office of Qinya City. Shen Tianzhan received them personally. The ones who'd arrived all sported an overbearing aura and the fiery crimson robes of the regional palace. The one who took the lead was a top-notch figure at holiness of nirvana level. A group of mighty figures arrived at the city lord's office of Qinya City. Shen Tianzhan received them personally. The ones who'd arrived all sported an overbearing aura and the fiery crimson robes of the regional palace. The one who took the lead was a top-notch figure at holiness of nirvana level. How may I be of service? Shen Tianzhan asked, cupping his hands. We're here to look for City Lord Yi, the man in the lead answered. City Lord Yi is now training in isolation. I'm sure you all know about the recent battle. He needs some time alone. Shen Tianzhan then added, if you don't mind, I'll be glad to relay the message. That will do. The messenger nodded slightly and continued. The regional palace hereby extends its invitation to Yi Futian and Xiaqing Yuan to join the regional palace for training. The invitees are welcome at the Crimson River any time. Many in the city lord's office looked up at the ones who'd arrived and shuddered deep down. While they'd speculated that something like this would happen, It still nonetheless proved shocking when the time came. The regional palace made yet another exception. In the Crimson Dragon realm, those who had missed the selection process at the Crimson River had not necessarily foregone their chance to join the regional palace just yet. If the ones intending to join the regional palace proved extraordinary enough, they still had a shot at it. Both Yi Futian and Xia Qingyuan had earned the regional palace's approval. What they'd done back at the Peach Banquet had proved exceptional enough. There was little need to say anything about Yi Futian. As for Xia Qingyuan, she had also proven her talents by defeating Xu Zi. As such, it was not a strange thing for the regional palace to extend their invitation to her as well. Very well, I shall inform City Lord Yi. Shen Tianzhan nodded. Common people would have been extremely elated by such news. However, those who'd truly earned the right to enter the regional palace would never be so excitable. That was because they were people who stood above most others, prideful and confident. As for Yi Futian, who was more than qualified to be ranked on the regional king rankings, the regional palace had made an exception by putting him on the rankings. Deeming him qualified to train in the regional palace was something normal enough. Shen Tianzhan felt no surprise about any of that. Compared to what Yi Futian had done before, getting into regional palace hardly seemed significant at all. What put him at ease, however, was that the invitation from the regional palace was akin to a tag for protection. So long as Yi Futian agreed to train in the regional palace, that would mean that he was out of the ninth servant's reach. While the ninth servant had scoffed at a cave master of the regional palace not long ago, showing how arrogant and abrasive he was, that was due only to his strength and backing. If one were to truly compare the strengths of their resources, there was no way ancient imperial city could compare with the regional palace. Furthermore, the regional palace was backed by the Crimson Dragon Emperor himself. Very well. Those from the regional palace nodded before departing into the sky. It seemed as if they had only been there to deliver the news. As for Yi Futian's choice, that was something entirely up to him. There were quite a few people who felt rather shocked by what had happened. Shen Tianzhan turned around, getting ready to tell Xia Qingyuan about it before letting both her and Yi Futian decide what to do about it. News quickly spread from the city lord's office of Qinya City that Yi Futian had accepted the regional palace's invitation and was about to train there. The news seemed to calm down the tense atmosphere that had been building up all over the place. Everyone was wondering if this meant that the great battle would be avoided. Yi Futian wanted to avoid confronting the ninth servant for the time being. Instead, he wanted to devote his time to training and enhancing his powers. However, when everyone realized that both Yi Futian and Xing Kai were about to train in the same place, the expression of many turned rather peculiar. They then wondered what would happen if they were to meet at the regional palace. Many wondered if they would continue fighting each other. Xing Kai was training in peace inside a palace within ancient imperial city. Dazzling light sparkled as the heaven-punishing fighting wool coursed all over him, emitting an imposing aura. However, Xing Kai's expression remained tense throughout the training, as if something was weighing on his shoulders. That battle in Crimson Dragon City had dealt a heavy blow to him. He'd never expected needing the ninth servant to show up, just so to keep him alive. It was an insult like no other to him. He heard footsteps approaching. Xing Kai opened his eyes to look at the ninth servant. His eyes no longer looked as pure and adamant as they had before. They looked tainted by some other thoughts. The ninth servant looked at his eyes. He was able to tell Xing Kai's current state of mind just by looking at those eyes. Xing Kai seemed to have developed some inner demons due to dealing with Yi Futian. Regardless of what you have run into on your path in cultivation, you needed to deal with it on your own. You have met your match this time, and he might be more extraordinary than any whom you have met in the past. Until you can overcome that, you will forever live in his shadow, the ninth servant said. I believe you could make it. Xing Kai remained silent. There was news not long ago that said that he has earned the approval of the regional palace, and is about to enter the regional palace to train. The two of you will probably meet in the future, the ninth servant continued. Xing Kai's eyes turned cold within an instant. So, Yi Futian was going to join the regional palace's ranks? Xing Kai got up and walked outside. He walked over to the steps and cast his gaze far away. Are you feeling disappointed in me, teacher? Shinkai asked. The ninth servant looked at his back and was silent. I'd like to hear the truth, Shinkai added. I'm disappointed because I have too high of an expectation of you. You should know the extent of the hope I've placed on you. But such a day would have come sooner or later on your path in cultivation. As such, I do hope you'll first win against yourself, young master, the ninth servant said with a bow. It seemed as if his attitude had changed. I have to win against myself because I couldn't win against them, eh? Shinkai sighed. It was not something that he could simply let slide. He needed the ninth servant to be around just so that he could survive. How could I face anyone else ever again? How could I ever claim to be a descendant of Emperor Zhan again? He was even more disappointed in himself. With your permission, I shall head to Qinya City right away. I will cut off their heads and bring them to the ancient imperial city. You will no longer have to be concerned about him if I were to do so, the ninth servant said while looking at Shinkai's back. Shinkai did not doubt the ninth servant. If he truly wanted the older man to do so, he only would have needed to tell the ninth servant, and the older man would see to it for him. However, it seemed ridiculous to send the ninth servant to kill someone who had defeated him. Sir, a voice was heard from below the steps. Someone had arrived, asking for an audience. What is it? The ninth servant turned around to look at the one who had spoken. His eyes were sharp as they shot through the space. He wondered what would have caused someone to interrupt him at such a moment. That man extended both hands, holding a letter. It looked like an invitation of sorts. The ninth servant grabbed at the air. The letter then flew right into his hands. The ninth servant opened up the letter to read its contents. While his expression looked as calm as it had always been, he shuddered somewhat deep down. The ninth servant's eyes seemed to pierce through the space before him, as he looked in the direction of Qinya City. City Lord Yi Futian of Qinya City. He really was something. What is that? Shinkai, who was at the ninth servant's side, saw his reaction. The ninth servant looked at Shinkai, but he did not hand the letter over. Shinkai seemed to have sensed that something was amiss, and extended his hand. The ninth servant only handed the letter over to him after that. Shinkai took a look at the letter. His eyes became extremely pointed within an instant. Powerful fighting will seem to surge from him uncontrollably, bursting out furiously. Yi Futian. This was just insane. That letter he'd sent to ancient imperial city was a challenge. A challenge to fight to the death right outside the regional palace, above the Crimson River. The regional palace would bear witness. The two of them would no longer be meeting within the regional palace, as Yi Futian intended to fight Shinkai to the death, right above the Crimson River, before entering the regional palace. Only one of them would be able to enter the regional palace alive. Yi Futian refused to coexist and train with him in the regional palace. One could imagine what was going on inside Shinkai's mind when he read the letter. He'd lost to Yi Futian and Yu Sheng in Crimson Dragon City not long ago. Now, Yi Futian had sent Shinkai a challenge. He would be the only combatant fighting Shinkai this time. Furthermore, the fight would be to the death, and be witnessed by the regional palace. Only one of them would make it out alive. This was unruliness and insolence of unprecedented levels. Shinkai had never expected Yi Futian to dare to challenge him to a one-on-one fight to the death. The ninth servant, who was at his side, was equally surprised. He thought Yi Futian would agree to train in the regional palace, because he wanted to avoid clashing head-on with ancient imperial city. However, he'd never expected such a challenge to be made before Yi Futian even agreed to train in the regional palace. Worse still, Shinkai's mindfulness of the path had been damaged, and his state of mind was faltering. There was no way he could shirk the battle after receiving such a letter. If he refused the challenge, his name Shinkai would no longer be worthy of pride but one filled with shame. Shinkai would never make it past his current state of mind. However, Shinkai wondered what had made Yi Futian so insolent and so confident that he would emerge as the victor. Shinkai wondering if Yi Futian had become a saint of true self. Are you going to accept the challenge? The ninth servant asked. Shinkai looked at him. The ninth servant was almost able to ascertain Shinkai's decision from the look in his eyes. Shinkai had no choice whatsoever when it came to accepting the challenge. He had to fight. "Excuse me for a bit," the ninth servant said. He finished talking and took one step away. His body soon disappeared into the air. Towering pressure reigned all over the city lord's office of Qinya City not long afterward. One figure after another took to the skies. All the holiness of nirvanas arrived midair and looked up. That pressure from above was very terrifying. Boom! A will of great path pressed down as a huge face appeared in midair. It was none other than a conjuration of the ninth servant's will. Terrifying will pressed down in a frenzy, heading straight for the city lord's office. A silver-haired figure took to the skies from within the city lord's office. Looking up at the face in the sky, he said, "Are you here to check on my plane out of concern?" The ninth servant placed mudras of God of War on both Xing brothers for protection. He would not have simply allowed Xing Kai to get into such a dangerous situation after receiving the challenge. If Yi Futian had indeed made it as a saint of true self, Xing Kai might have just signed his death warrant. The ninth servant knew very well from that battle in Crimson Dragon City that if both men were to be of an equal plane and fight to the death, Xing Kai would definitely end up dead. As such, he'd shown up personally to find out. A raging will pressure continued to shroud the place. That huge face stared at Yi Futian, who was among the crowd below. The ninth servant found that the young man was still at the proving holiness level. The ninth servant then wondered what had made the young man so confident that he would issue a challenge to fight Xing Kai one-on-one. In that battle back in Crimson Dragon City, both Yu Sheng and the Halberd of Time and Space had only served as auxiliaries. If the two men fought one-on-one to the death, things would be very different. Yi Futian truly needed to be able to win against Xing Kai. Otherwise, he would be the one who would end up dead. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The ninth servant did not reply to Yi Futian's words, but it was clear that he was concerned about Yi Futian's plane. If Yi Futian had indeed become a saint of true self, Xing Kai would be in a lot of trouble. He definitely would not allow Xing Kai to fight. A damaged mindfulness of the path could be repaired, but if he were to die in a fight, everything would be over. The ninth servant did not reply to Yi Futian's words, but it was clear that he was concerned about Yi Futian's plane. If Yi Futian had indeed become a saint of true self, Xing Kai would be in a lot of trouble. He definitely would not allow Xing Kai to fight. A damaged mindfulness of the path could be repaired, but if he were to die in a fight, everything would be over. Furthermore, the spot that Yi Futian had picked for the fight was indeed brutal. Above the Crimson River, outside of the regional palace. He had no intention of showing mercy in any manner. Even someone as powerful as the ninth servant would not be able to interfere in a battle fought right outside the regional palace. If Xing Kai accepted the challenge, there would be no turning back. As such, the ninth servant had to go and check. The huge face gradually disappeared, along with that powerful aura emanating from the sky above. Shen Tianzhan, Wu Yong, and the others rescinded their auras as well, walking down to Yi Futian's side. Shen Tianzhan then said, "He's gone." The ninth servant had indeed only shown up to take a look. However, now that the ninth servant had come to take a look, there was simply no way Xing Kai could walk away from the battle. There was simply no reason for him to do so. If Xing Kai were to refuse, then he would lose all face and no longer be able to stand in the Crimson Dragon realm. He would be unable to even return to the regional palace. All of that would have profound effects on Xing Kai. It would probably result in the total disintegration of his mindfulness of the path, making further advancement impossible. If he were unable to resolve that trauma, he would never be able to become an unblemished saint in this lifetime. A huge commotion broke out in Qinya City, right after the ninth servant left. The conflict between ancient Imperial City and Qinya City had been catching the attention of everyone recently. Many thought that things had been resolved by Yi Futian, agreeing to join the ranks of the regional palace. However, they quickly found that Yi Futian had issued a challenge to fight to the death instead. The fight would take place 7 days later, above the Crimson River, outside of the regional palace. Only the winner would be able to make it into the regional palace. Yi Futian did not want to coexist with Xing Kai. There would only be one of them left standing. That was confidence like no other, for he had challenged Xing Kai, who was a saint of true self, as a saint at proving holiness level. Everyone wondered where Yi Futian's confidence had come from. While he and Yi Sheng had teamed up and managed to pin down Xing Kai in their last battle, fighting him one-on-one would be something else altogether. Furthermore, it was a fight to the death, and Xing Kai would definitely go all out. Yi Futian had not even bothered giving himself a way out. Everyone deemed that the young city lord of Qianye City was indeed brutal. He was not only brutal towards his opponent, but he was also brutal to himself. Many wondered what the consequences of losing the battle would be. The ninth servant returned, and everything else happened as expected. Xing Kai accepted the challenge. He would show up 7 days later above the Crimson River, with the sole purpose of cutting down Yi Futian. Such massively shocking news traveled throughout the cities like wildfire. Countless listeners shuddered at the news. This showdown would truly be considered a clash of titans. Xing Kai had only lost shortly after he'd gained renown, and he'd lost at the hands of both Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. City Lord Yi Futian of Qianye City had quickly risen in fame after he'd became known to the world. His actions had truly shocked the Crimson Dragon realm. At present, there was not a single person who didn't know Yi Futian's name. Two such figures were about to have a showdown above the Crimson River, and one could only imagine just how shocking things would become. Many had only heard about the battle that had taken place in Crimson Dragon City, so they deemed the next one as something not to be missed. Time passed and Yi Futian remained training in isolation in Qianye City. Xing Kai of ancient Imperial City was doing the same. The ninth servant oversaw his training personally. A saint of true self like Xing Kai would not benefit much from guidance from outside, but he could nonetheless prepare a few more tricks up his sleeves for the fight. Yi Futian trained in the way of the staff at times, and the way of the halberd at others while still in Qianye City. He kept improving on his techniques to make the attacks even more powerful. He stopped training after quite a while, when he noticed someone approaching him. It was Xia Qingyuan. "Are you sure you're going to win?" Xia Qingyuan asked. Yi Futian's opponent was not some common saint. His opponent was going to be Xing Kai, who was known throughout all of Crimson Dragon Realm. Furthermore, Yi Futian was about to fight someone one saint plane above his own. She knew that Yi Futian must have learned something from that battle back at Crimson Dragon City that had made him bold enough to challenge Xing Kai in such a manner. "I'm not," Yi Futian said with a smile. Xia Qingyuan was baffled. She stared at him, wide-eyed. Was he telling her that he was not sure that he could win? "I could probably win." Yi Futian looked at Xia Qingyuan's expression and grinned. "Probably?" Xia Qingyuan continued to stare at him. It seemed as if none of those were the answers she sought. "If I were to have absolute confidence in my ability to win, there is no way that Xing Kai would have agreed to the challenge. I'm afraid the ninth servant wouldn't have agreed to it in the first place." Yi Futian continued, seeing how Xia Qingyuan was not going to just let it slide. "But my chance of winning is greater." "A greater chance at winning made you dare to throw a fight-to-the-death challenge at him?" A rather cynical voice was heard. Yi Futian turned around and saw two men walking towards him, Wu Yong and an elder. He was rather surprised to see that elder, as it was none other than the star-plucking saint, who had appeared and helped him several times in the past. That old man had even given Yi Futian the first flames of the way he'd stolen, before disappearing without a trace. He'd then shown up at the last battle at Qianye City to stop Gai Huang. He then disappeared again after that battle. He came and went as he pleased, and no one was able to get a hold of him. The old man seemed to truly live up to his reputation. Now he'd appeared yet again. "I've heard that you've been to ancient Imperial City, Senior," Yi Futian said, looking at the star-plucking saint. The old man glared at him and replied, "Enough with old stories. Seems like the rumors were true. But why did you go to ancient Imperial City, despite knowing that you wouldn't be able to win against the ninth servant?" Yi Futian asked. The old man glared at him even more intensely. The young man really had a way of getting on people's bad side. Yi Futian then looked rather apologetic after seeing the old man's expression. He bowed to the old man respectfully and said, "You've helped me several times, Senior, and I'm grateful for that. But I'd really like to know, why did you help me?" You know that I've been to ancient imperial city, so you'd know the beef between me and them. The ninth servant of ancient imperial city is known as the number one figure outside of Crimson Dragon City. He is also known to be invincible in terms of offensive capacity. I've lost to him, and I'm afraid I'm stuck as a loser. I saw your battle with Emperor Li's realm before coincidentally. I saw that you have a lot of potential in you, so I gave you the flames. And man, you've even gotten your hands on Emperor Qua's ruins. I'm truly honored and relieved, now that I see you fighting ancient imperial city. Is that all? Yi Futian asked with a peculiar expression on his face. Do you think that I have something to hide then? The old man glared at Yi Futian. Very well then. Yi Futian took the answer for what it was worth. He was able to see that the old man was immensely cunning. The old man was someone who would have spilled what he wanted to say. There was no way Yi Futian could have fished anything out of him if he refused to talk. As such, he left it as it was. So, what brings you here, senior? Yi Futian asked. I heard that you chose the starry steel ancient path, while you were on the divine martial path back at the peach banquet. The ability that I'm most proficient in is that of the stars, so I'm here to teach you what I know. The lessons will not be as good as those found in the royal palace, but I'll let you decide for yourself if what I teach will be useful to you or not. It may enable you to kill that fellow from ancient imperial city without mercy, the old man explained. Yi Futian's jaw dropped. Talk about living as you fancy. But then again, the old man was known as the star-plucking saint, so he would definitely be very proficient in the powers of stars. In that case, thank you very much, senior, Yi Futian said, cupping his hands. Someone had arrived at his door to help further his training. He would have been an idiot to refuse. Regardless, it was clear that the old man held no enmity towards him. Keep your eyes, ears, and everything else peeled. The old man's eyes became incredibly deep all of a sudden. He slowly walked towards Yi Futian, and within an instant, Yi Futian's eyes seemed to have sunken into them. He did not resist, simply letting his will enter those eyes. There was a world of stars to be found within. Yi Futian was completely steeped in it before long. He remained steeped in his training, and would not emerge from it for quite a while, even after the old man left. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. It was too short a time in Crimson Dragon Realm. His training in isolation was over before long. The day had arrived when Yi Futian and Xing Kai would have their showdown. The crowd at the shores of the Crimson River was huge. Countless mighty beings arrived, including some great figures of top-notch forces, as well as top-class geniuses from all corners of the world. All of their attention was turned toward that raging river. The Battle of the Crimson River was held there every year, an event that was guaranteed to draw a huge crowd. However, the battle that would be held on this day had captured more attention than any battle of the Crimson River in the past ever had. The Battle of the Crimson River was originally meant to be a battle between figures at the pinnacles of their powers. The ultimate winner would be accepted into the regional palace. However, that impending battle was between two immensely powerful figures ranked on the regional king rankings. Furthermore, it was a fight to the death. Two geniuses who stood at the pinnacle of Crimson Dragon Realm were about to fight above the Crimson River. Outsiders aside, even the ones from the regional palace came to stand outside the regional palace. Their eyes were locked onto that raging river before them. Pei Min Yin Tianjiao, Xu Zi, Xie Qingshan, and many top-notch geniuses were also present. On the opposite shore of the Crimson River, Luo Yang, Jiang Ti, and many who had been present at the peach banquet were there as well. The entire Crimson Dragon realm was paying close attention to this showdown. Who do you think will win this? Xie Qingshan asked rather excitedly. I've heard that the ninth servant went to check on Yi Futian's progress at Qinya City. It seems that Yi Futian has yet to make a breakthrough, while Yu Sheng and Yi Futian beat Xing Kai by teaming up before. But if it will be the two of them fighting one-on-one, I'm afraid Xing Kai will have a better chance of winning. Yin Tianjiao said. Of course, that is only in theory. Yi Futian is the one who issued the challenge, and it's obvious that he's not doing this because he has a death wish. In that case, we should just let him prove how much he is capable of. The outcome is rather hard to predict now. Yu Sheng suppressed Xing Kai hard in their last battle. Yu Sheng made the first move and dominated Xing Kai every time, preventing Xing Kai from having time to deal with Yi Futian, right until he was defeated by that divine implement. I think that battle simply gave Yi Futian too much confidence. Xu Zi did not agree with Yin Tianjiao. She continued with a cold tone, saying, "There will be no surprises with this battle." It was apparent that she thought Xing Kai would win. "I think Yi Futian has better chances," Pei Min said plainly, his voice sounding easygoing and nonchalant. There was hardly any reason behind it. There was no way any analysis of their strengths could make a definite conclusion. He simply stated what he felt. They were not the only ones speculating. The people of the entire Crimson Dragon realm were speculating about who would win in this showdown. Terrifying might of the great path down rained from above. The Crimson River howled and rolled. A figure appeared in the air, and then walked forward, heading straight for the Crimson River. Xing Kai is here. All eyes were on him. Fighting wool coursed all over him, and washed all over his immediate vicinity. The battle had yet to begin, yet his fighting wool was barely contained. It pulsed ferociously all over him, engulfing the space right above the Crimson River. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The Crimson River howled and rolled. The hot flames stained the sky above everyone red. Xing Kai stood with his fighting wool coiled around his body. His eyes were cold yet determined. His tall, imposing body looked like a stone pillar, only his clothes billowing in the wind. The Crimson River howled and rolled. The hot flames stained the sky above everyone red. Xing Kai stood with his fighting wool coiled around his body. His eyes were cold yet determined. His tall, imposing body looked like a stone pillar, only his clothes billowing in the wind. He was adjusting his aura, getting it into the most perfect state possible. To Xing Kai, this was a battle that he could absolutely not afford to lose. Yi Futian had issued a fight-to-the-death challenge to him despite being only at proving holiness level. Xing Kai had reigned supreme among his generation in the Crimson Dragon realm, and had never lost before. He had to win in this battle above the Crimson River today as well. He was going to cut down Yi Futian, take his revenge, and make his mindfulness of the path whole again. The ninth servant was there today as well. Many at the shores of the Crimson River made way for him. All eyes were on the ninth servant. This battle would determine the rest of Xing Kai's life. At that moment, there was quite a commotion at the shore, and many opened up a path. A group of people was seen moving forward, cutting through the crowd. The one taking the lead was clad in white, and had silver hair. He looked extremely dashing. That man was none other than Yi Futian. Many mighty figures from Qinya City were there as well. Xia Qingyuan and Yu Sheng both stood by his side. If Yi Futian won, the three of them would get to train in the regional palace together. It was finally time. Many turned their eyes to look at Yi Futian. Xing Kai, who was above the Crimson River, turned to face Yi Futian. The fighting wool all over his body seemed to grow even stronger as he adjusted his spiritual state. Despite being very sure that he would definitely be able to kill Yi Futian, he was not going to lower his guard. He would give it his all and cut down Yi Futian to prove his worth. Yi Futian took a step forward once he reached the shore, heading straight for the middle of the Crimson River. Several formidable ori shrouded the Crimson River high in the air. They were people from the regional palace. Yi Futian had requested that the regional palace bear witness to this battle. Yet another formidable aura came down, streaking through the air above the crowd. Many looked up above the Crimson River. They had been rather irked before, but their anger quickly subsided. People from the royal palace were showing up. Two figures appeared above before everyone else, landing at the edge of the Crimson River. They stood at the very forefront of the crowd, yet no one objected. Wasn't that peach banquet hosted by Qi Shang? He is here to watch the battle. Many looked at the figure at the forefront of the crowd. Indeed, it was none other than Prince Qi Shang. The person by his side was none other than Yu Shifei, his lover. The two of them were ranked on the regional king rankings. This is quite a pity, Qi Shang said, taking a look at the Crimson River. While the stronger of the two fighters had already been identified back at the Divine Martial Road, Yi Futian was nonetheless the one with greater potential. However, Xing Kai was the one who had renewed the record at the last peach banquet. It was a pity that he had run into Yi Futian and Yu Sheng at the last one. Furthermore, he was unable to accept that both of them were more superb than he was. The two legendary figures were unable to coexist. It had been determined on that day that one of them must fall, which was quite a pity. After all, both men were top geniuses of the Crimson Dragon realm. But then again, regardless of what Qi Shang thought of the battle, he was not about to get involved. Feuds in the world of cultivators were not things that could be settled by talking. Since both of them had agreed to fight to the death, all the prince needed to do was simply bear witness to it all. The crowd quickly turned its eyes away from Qi Shang and Yu Shifei, watching the Crimson River instead. It was apparent that the fight to the death battle between Yi Futian and Xing Kai was more interesting than anyone showing up to watch it, even if one of the people was the prince. Furthermore, despite the two men standing very far away from each other, their presence and auras were already clashing. When Yi Futian stepped forward, Xing Kai's fighting will rain down across the space, shrouding their vicinity and pressing down on Yi Futian. That fighting will seem to coalesce into solid attacks, thrashing and striking at Yi Futian furiously. Yi Futian slowly walked forward, every step shaking the space around him. The Crimson River below howled and rolled. He attacked with the deed of thorough comprehension without hesitation, melding with the Great Path, making it so that everything in the world around him fell into his hands, resisting the fighting while bearing down on him. Dazzling light glittered as Xing Kai's fighting will took a solid form. It was transmuted into a seal as its power spread through their surroundings, enveloping the sky above the Crimson River, lashing out straight at Yi Futian. Xing Kai was already attacking Yi Futian from across the great river. Yi Futian glared at Xing Kai across the vast space. There was no anxiousness in his eyes at all. Chaotic currents whipped around him all of a sudden like devastating lightning bolts. The world around him turned into a world of destruction. Calamities of the Great Path raged on all around him. Countless lightning strikes of calamity shrouded the place, lashing out furiously. A beam of dazzling golden light of calamity collided with the seal, resulting in a furious rumble. The seal crumbled right away, as if it had been hit with a devastating attack. Raging light of calamity tore through everything around Yi Futian without care, enveloping the space around him, and hitting every single seal that it met. The Crimson River roared as the sky above the river looked like it must be doomsday. Many seals were destroyed by that glittering lightning of calamity. He is that powerful with attacks. Countless eyes were locked onto the figure basking in the devastating light of calamity. Yi Futian's plane was lower than Xing Kai's after all, yet he was able to destroy Xing Kai's will of the Great Path, using only borrowed might of the Great Path alone. It was as if he was not at a disadvantage at all. Xing Kai looked unfazed as he watched everything in silence. He then saw Yi Futian approaching him. He responded by cranking up the fighting will on him accordingly. The heaven-punishing fighting will burst from his body furiously as his life spirit was unleashed, making him look as if he was an awakened god of war. Brilliantly shining rings appeared above his body. That fighting will affected the will of the Great Path all around him. The roar of the Crimson River grew increasingly frightening, making it sound as if the clouds above them were roaring in anger as well. Xing Kai's body grew extremely tall, as if he was a god of war waking up, and cranked the heaven-punishing fighting will to its maximum, exuding pressure all over the sky around him. He had been repeatedly hammered by Yu Sheng in the last battle in Crimson Dragon City, which had greatly affected his combat capacity, making it so that he had no time to burst with complete power. In the battle he was fighting at present, he was determined to let Yi Futian see another Xing Kai, one who lived up to the identity of being a descendant of Emperor Zhan. Boundless heaven-punishing fighting will coalesced as he extended his hand, conjuring a huge spear which pulsed with holy light. What was even more terrifying was that beams of devastating light of the Great Path tore through the space around them, which seemed to be a manifestation of the heaven-punishing fighting will, raining down from the heavens, tearing through their surroundings as they lashed out at Yi Futian. Many looked up at the scene above, finding it utterly terrifying. Even though Xing Kai had lost recently, that was not to say that his fame had been for nothing. Shinkai was truly powerful, and had repeatedly proven so in many battles. His powers were definitely top class, and few throughout Crimson Dragon Realm were able to match him blow for blow. The pressure which emanated from him at that moment seemed to be a testament to his strength. That utterly overbearing stance and action seemed to make people forget about his current plane level, as he seemed like a living god of war. Futian looked up. The beams of dazzling golden light rained down like spears, heading straight for him. He took one furious step forward, and the entire area shook. A space-freezing power was unleashed as the light emitted from the deed of thorough comprehension shrouded his surroundings. The scene transformed into a world of stars shortly after. Stars circled about, protecting him within. The raining spears clashed with the huge stars, resulting in earth-shattering rumbles. Terrifying explosions were heard all over the Crimson River. Boom! Shinkai moved in the air as heaven-punishing fighting will burst to the extreme wherever the spears pointed. The entire sky around them seemed shrouded by the might. Countless spears rained down at once, tearing through space as they headed for Futian. Shinkai had been unleashing his heaven-punishing fighting will in a frenzy since the battle commenced. He had not shown the slightest hint of wanting to take his time to spar with Futian. He was trying to pin Futian down in the showdown, without the slightest hint of reservation. Futian naturally sensed Shinkai's intentions. The attacks had been overwhelming from the start. Shinkai's killing intention towards him was unmistakably strong. Powerful spiritual will was unleashed and melded with the vast surroundings around them. The great path expanded and multiplied, giving birth to all in the universe. Wherever the will of the great path reached, everything was turned into a personal expression of their powers. A dazzling starry world glittered above the Crimson River. More stars were conjured and appeared in their surroundings, emitting an extremely brilliant light. Those stars circled Futian's body, which seemed to meld with the stars, making him the absolute center of that starry world. The stars around him coursed with mystical trajectories. Their surroundings rumbled as the spinning stars clashed with the huge spears raining down from above, bursting with a devastating force that shook the heavens. The ninth servant, who was standing at the shore, frowned, finding all of this similar to the most proficient arts of the star-plucking saint. According to Gai Huang, that old man had fought him once at Qinya City, holding him back. It seemed that the star-plucking saint was indeed on Qinya City's side. However, it was not so easy to block the spears of a god of war. Shinkai turned into a golden bolt of lightning at that moment, tearing through space as countless spears burst, blasting the stars of the great path surrounding Futian. Violent rumbles continued to be heard as the stars crumbled and the spears shattered. Golden, divine spears appeared and blasted at the orbiting stars. Light conjured from the boundless heaven-punishing fighting will lashed out in an instant, causing the trajectories of the stars to crumble and turn chaotic, as they were being destroyed in a frenzy. The devastating lighting pulsing on the spears continued to move forward, hitting the screens of light, and intending to kill Futian. However, Futian stepped forward at that moment. He twirled about as he moved, conjuring a halberd his hand. He then lashed out with the halberd. The stars circling him turned into beams of light which blasted Shinkai's body, intending to bury him in the stars. Shinkai then stepped forward and continued lashing out with his spears. His force was unyielding and one star after another was shattered as he continued to destroy anything that stood in his way. At that moment, the light of the stars all around Futian gathered into a single point. The halberd thrust, clashing with the spear heading straight for him. Boundless lights from the stars gushed and melded with the halberd, as if that one strike carried the power of all the stars around. At the very moment, the halberd and the spear clashed. Everything around the weapons crumbled into nothingness. The Crimson River below howled and rolled in a frenzy. Scorching fires of lava in the river splashed, drowning the space around them. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Shinkai took his god of war form in the middle of the chaotic battlefield. His eyes were cold and determined, without a single hint of indecision. The spear in his hand crumbled and was entirely destroyed. He sensed the terrifying entropic powers from what was happening. It was as if there were some terrifying space-shredding powers imbued within the power of the stars. Such was the way of entropy. Shinkai took his god of war form in the middle of the chaotic battlefield. His eyes were cold and determined, without a single hint of indecision. The spear in his hand crumbled and was entirely destroyed. He sensed the terrifying entropic powers from what was happening. It was as if there were some terrifying space-shredding powers imbued within the power of the stars. Such was the way of entropy. That entropic power was something he had not seen when he'd last fought Futian. The stars around Futian were crumbling in a frenzy as well. The halberd in his hand was pierced by a powerful beam of light, quickly reducing to nothingness. However, he was able to fight just as well without a weapon. He took the shock of the halberd's destruction head-on with his god of war form, then took one step forward to overpower the space around him. He lifted his arm, causing seals to appear everywhere. Every single seal was imbued with terrifying heaven-punishing fighting will. These turned into divine seals made specifically for combat. He thrust his arm forward, and an extremely huge palm print locked the space around them down, blocking out the sky and drowning Futian's body within. At the same time, that palm print howled as it was blasted by all the other seals around it. They were so powerful that they seemed to be able to tear the sky itself apart. Shinkai's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He was a saint of true self, which meant that his power of the Great Path was far above Futian's. He was also armed with heaven-punishing fighting will, and the Madra of God of War. In terms of close combat capacity, he deemed that there was no way Futian would be able to resist his attacks. Countless people at the shores of the Crimson River and the regional palace witnessed that scene. They saw Shinkai's body merge with his life spirit, and his entire body emit dazzling light. It seemed as if he was shrouded in the heaven-punishing fighting will, emanating a will of the god of war like no other. That extremely imposing form of his made it, so that many were able to sense its might even from far away. Just how great of a power was Futian taking on? The battle was not just sparring but a fight to the death. Shinkai had no intention of sparring with Futian. He'd brought his most powerful offensive techniques into the fight, without delay for the express purpose of killing Futian. Futian shot a glance at the extremely imposing Shinkai, so he was going for a showdown right from the start. Another halberd was conjured as he was shrouded by the ring of light, conjured by the deed of thorough comprehension. He saw the seals coming down at him from all sides, yet he did not back away. He took one step forward, just like Shinkai. "You're wasting your time." Shinkai's voice was cold as he howled through their surroundings. His voice was imbued with the towering fighting will, capable of shaking the will of others. Yet at that moment, within the ring of light conjured by the deed of thorough comprehension, beams of light of even greater intensity appeared out of nowhere. It was as if thousands of ancient symbols appeared at the same time, surrounding Futian. Every single symbol seemed to be imbued with extremely formidable powers. Their surroundings rumbled and exploded as the symbols circled Futian. It was the sign of the formless power of suppression emanated by Shinkai being destroyed, making it impossible for him to stop the orbits of the ancient symbols. The 1,000-character proverb, Qi Shang, who was standing at the forefront at the shore of the Crimson River, was rather shocked. Futian had been the one who was able to comprehend the 1,000-character proverb better than anyone else. He had also earned himself the tablet, which was crafted by a Renhuang, enabling one to extend one's spiritual will into it for learning purposes. Futian was obviously able to bring the power of the 1,000-character proverb into the fight with Shinkai despite not having possessed it for long. So that was why he dared to issue such a challenge. Futian swung the halberd in his hand around. The symbols around him all howled at the same time. Every single symbol seemed to have been infused with Futian's will of the Great Path. Powers of the Great Path were infused within the symbols, with the ones at the forefront already clashing with the seals. Boom! A rumble was heard as the symbols blasted onto the seals like stars of the Great Path, shattering them. Thousands of seals flooded the place, blocking out the sky as they flew at Futian. However, The symbols around him seemed to flow like the light of meteors, blasting at the countless seals coming from the other side. The world around them seemed ready to break apart at any moment. Devastating currents swept about in a frenzy above the Crimson River, causing the eardrums of all within earshot to ache. Still, they nonetheless kept their eyes fixed before them, not wanting to miss a single detail of the battle. The fighting at that moment looked incredibly grand and magnificent. The ancient symbols continued to move forward in a mystical pattern, clashing with the seals from the other side. It was like every single symbol was a seal on its own. Boom! Neither man flinched on that tremendously terrifying battlefield. They moved forward at the same time as the palm prints from Xingkai continued to blast at Yi Futian's symbols. Other than the most powerful of seals, which was shrouding the place and blocking out the sky, all of the ancient symbols were quickly shattered and destroyed. However, as Yi Futian swung around with the halberd, the symbols blasted forth one after another, causing the palm print, which blocked out the sky, to rattle. More rumbles were heard, but their force seemed to have been considerably diminished. At that very moment, Yi Futian's halberd burst with extremely brilliant light as it thrust at the palm print like a heavenly weapon. The ancient symbols right before the halberd seemed to have merged into a single entity. Every single symbol looked like a star as they blasted forth with the halberd into the palm print. Stifled rumbles were heard in that instant. A crisp cracking sound was heard as the huge Madra of God of War began to break apart. The halberd was pulsing with boundless light, a result of the light of the deed of thorough comprehension being melded within it. Boom! A rumble was heard as that magnificent palm print that had been blocking out the sky crumbled and was reduced to nothingness. It's broken. The hearts of many who witnessed the scene raced. Yi Futian had been able to break Xingkai's Madra of God of War right away, just by using his own power. He'd had no need for godlike weapons. The thing that he had just destroyed had been thought to be unmatched in terms of its offensive capacity. Yet he'd done it. Xingkai had never lost a single fight with his peers before the Peach Banquet. He had been able to win every single fight, using his peerless offensive powers. Yet at that very moment, those extremely overwhelming major offensive techniques of his had been overcome by Yi Futian's halberd. Was this the power of the 1,000-character proverb? Every single symbol had been an attack on the Great Path. When the symbols moved and attacked, it was as if the stars were all blasting at the same time. The entropic powers brought froth within that instant had been more than enough to tear through everything. Even the Madra of God of War had been destroyed all the same. Xingkai was dumbfounded. His expression suggested that he'd been caught off guard. His art at the spear, and the power of the Madra of God of War, had all been defeated by Yi Futian. The attacks that had made him invincible in the past had just been shredded apart by someone of a lower plane than he. Furthermore, Yi Futian had not evaded his attacks at all. He had been attacking head-on all the time. Xingkai's major offensive skills had been clashing with Yi Futian's attacks head-on as well, and he too had never evaded. Xingkai lowered his head and looked at Yi Futian, who was basking in divine light. When the deed of thorough comprehension was brought to bear, his power turned into a cauldron of the Great Path, melding with the path of the world that surrounded them. Powerful spiritual will burst forth shortly after, cranking his combat prowess to the greatest level achievable. The person and the Great Path merged. His spiritual will, physical body, and way of the Great Path combined, merging into a single entity, reaching the most perfect state. He watched Yi Futian wielding the miracles. Stars appeared everywhere, shrouding the sky above the Crimson River, and circling all around them. The stars seemed to all be emanating dazzling godly light, reaching down to Yi Futian, and merging with his body. The man seemed to command the heavens, the earth, and everything around him. An unassuming elder appeared in the massive crowd at the shores of the Crimson River. His expression was strange when he saw that dazzling scene before them. While he had indeed imparted his methods of training to Yi Futian not long ago, he'd never thought that the results of the lesson would be so dazzling. It was a testament to his ability that Yi Futian had indeed fused the mystical techniques perfectly, connecting them with his spiritual will. Such talents were very surprising. It was no surprise why the combat prowess he'd brought to bear had been able to resist Xing Kai, who wielded the heaven-punishing fighting will. If it had been a common saint of true self instead of Xing Kai, said saint would have probably been thoroughly overwhelmed. Was this truly the power a proving holiness level saint was able to bring out? A beam of dazzling light burst forward just as that old man was thinking about this, drawing an arc above the crimson river. Futian turned the tides and headed upwards, lashing out with his halberd again. It penetrated the sky and headed straight for Xing Kai's gigantic body. The halberd brought the power of the stars with it as it moved, arriving at its target in an instant. That halberd itself seemed imbued with the power of stars, which contained extremely formidable powers of entropy. The seals that Xing Kai had conjured were shattered in an instant. The halberd then banged against Xing Kai's gigantic body. Surprisingly, the huge god of war was sent flying. Deafening rumbles were. That huge body of his crumbled as the might of entropy blasted him apart. Xing Kai's god of war battle form was reduced to nothing. What kind of an attack? The spectators were all stunned by the extremely formidable attacks that Futian could produce. Many wondered just how powerful that halberd was. Perhaps the answer was known only to Xing Kai, who'd taken the brunt of the attack head-on. The crimson river continued to roar, yet the battlefield had turned somewhat quiet. Countless pairs of eyes gazed forward. That battle of life and death had been treated as a showdown right from the start, both combatants bringing out their strongest attacks. No one had expected Futian to be able to overwhelm Xing Kai. Everyone then looked at the figure whose battle form crumbled, wondering if it had indeed been Xing Kai, who had been extremely prideful and known to be invincible among his peers. Xing Qiu felt rather terrible watching the fight. With all his powers, his elder brother had never lost like this before. However, those two men who had emerged out of nowhere from Qianya City had caused even his brother's bright light to dim. All of this had started with that battle he'd had with Yu Sheng. "Are you ready to die now?" Futian asked as he walked through the air. His eyes were plain and uncaring as he looked at Xing Kai. This had always been a fight to the death. The winner would live and the loser would die. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Xing Kai's aura wavered as his body seemed to arch. His god of war battle form crumbled, being destroyed by one thrust of the halberd. His arm was shaking slightly. It was not a reaction from fear, but from the fact that he had lost the fight. Xing Kai's aura wavered as his body seemed to arch. His god of war battle form crumbled, being destroyed by one thrust of the halberd. His arm was shaking slightly. It was not a reaction from fear, but from the fact that he had lost the fight. His Madra of god of war and his god of war battle form had both been destroyed by Futian. He was unable to accept that he, a saint of true self, had actually lost to Futian. The heaven-punishing fighting will was capable of bringing out one's spiritual will in extreme fighting conditions, enabling one to burst with combat prowess far exceeding one's natural abilities. All of his attacks were imbued with extremely terrifying attacking powers, the Madra of God of War even more so. Despite possessing such formidable powers, and his plane being much higher than Futian's, he had nonetheless lost, and was unable to understand why. Xing Kai was a descendant of Emperor Zhan. He was destined to become a Runhuang himself. He was born being able to wield heaven-punishing fighting will. How could I have lost? How could I even lose? Boom! A stifled noise was heard, shaking the space around them. Mighty crimson flames howled and pinned him down. Xing Kai looked up and saw Futian moving forward. His aura continued to grow in intensity. Dazzling light circled all around him. It was as if he was clad in all the stars of the cosmos. He looked imposing with the halberd in his hand. His eyes were filled with contempt as he looked down at Xing Kai. He was preparing to kill Xing Kai. The shores of the Crimson River were silent as the spectators watched the battlefield. Was Xing Kai even able to fight anymore? The ninth servant was present as well. His expression was calm. That young man from Emperor Xia's realm had been able to overwhelm Xing Kai both in actual powers and talents. This was undeniable. However, Futian was not able to kill Xing Kai just yet. Things had yet to turn that dire. Xing Kai was about to defend his life and honor. The ninth servant was hoping that Xing Kai would turn a new leaf after the battle. Even if he were to pay a hefty price to do so, it would be a new start for Xing Kai so long as he was able to win. If he were able to make it past that stage, Xing Kai would grow even more powerful than he had been before. His state of mind would become even more resilient. It would pave the way to reaching the third plane of sainthood, unblemished saint. Any price would be worthwhile. That was a battle that Xing Kai would have to fight one day. Yi Futian, an extremely dazzling genius like no other, was a gift from the heavens to Xing Kai. Boom! Another stifled rumble was heard. Yi Futian lifted his arm. He was probably able to end Xing Kai's life at any given moment. Boom! A lightning bolt streaked by, and Yi Futian disappeared from where he stood. He thrust the halberd, emitting a light so blinding that no one could look at it. Would Xing Kai be able to take this hit? Boom! Countless pairs of eyes locked onto the scene. When the spectators made clear of what was happening above the Crimson River, their hearts raced. That is, many saw Yi Futian's halberd lashing out straight at Xing Kai. The stars in the sky merged into a single entity. The extremely overwhelming attacks blasted at Xing Kai. However, Xing Kai continued to stand tall and proud. His life spirit seemed to be burning. That tall, imposing shadow of a god of war burned with golden divine flames. Beams of extremely dazzling light glittered over Xing Kai's body. A tremendously terrifying protector god appeared around Xing Kai. The heaven-punishing fighting will continue to burn, engulfing the powers of the great path of the world around them. The flames of the way all over the crimson sky were being devoured by his body, which then shrouded him entirely. Xing Kai's body expanded exponentially. Cracking sounds erupted as his face twisted. He howled at the sky, roaring in anger. Boom! Extremely raging currents swept forward and sent Yi Futian flying. His pupils constricted somewhat, looking at Xing Kai, whose body continued to expand. Cracking noises continued to be heard. The bones in Xing Kai's body expanded. His life spirit burned. The blood within his body, and every bit of his heaven-punishing fighting, will burned up as well. It was as if Xing Kai was burning his life away in that fight. Xing Kai's gigantic form appeared above the Crimson River. The spectators at the shores were shaking furiously. Not even the cultivators of the regional palace had ever seen Xing Kai use such powers before. He's forcibly breaking the limits of his body by burning his life spirit and the heaven-punishing fighting will, making himself the embodiment of the heaven-punishing battle form. Pei Min mumbled to himself. Xing Kai is effectively cornered now, and he is fighting with his life. What he needs to pay back is something difficult to measure. He's probably going to pay dearly. A descendant of Emperor Zhan shouldn't be underestimated. However, even if he can win, it won't have been a glorious victory. It will take no less than a year for him to return to his previous state, someone in the crowd said. But then again, it's Yi Futian who's in trouble now. Many listening stayed silent. It was undeniable that Xing Kai was very terrifying in this state. With him going on a full burn to bring out all of his potential, the fight from here on out would be disastrous for Yi Futian. Boom! A rumble was heard as Xing Kai stepped into the air. He then ran into the sky, which was quite a surprise. Every step he took caused his surroundings to shake. The Crimson River below continued to howl in a frenzy. The water of the Crimson River burst like a tidal wave, flooding the sky with massive towering waves. He's fast. The hearts of the spectators raced. Xing Kai, who had taken the form of a god of war, was able to move with speed and agility that were entirely comparable to his usual self. His body expanded to massive sizes, and both his power and defense were brought to new heights. Many wondered just how terrifying Xing Kai could become. A rumble was heard as Xing Kai lifted his arm and headed for Yi Futian. The sky was blocked as his palm print became the mudra of God of War itself, tearing through everything and suppressing the space around him. Dazzling light burst over Yi Futian. He lashed out with his halberd, clashing with the palm print in the air. The terrifying, massive force was sensed and the halberd crumbled. However, Yi Futian used the resulting force to propel himself through space, distancing himself from Xing Kai. How do you suppose you can kill me now? Xingkai looked at Yi Futian from afar. His voice sounded like it belonged to something from hell. Yi Futian had forced Xingkai's hand so badly that the latter needed to burn himself in order to fight. After the battle, it would probably take a year or two for him to be able to return to his previous state. He might have even damaged the foundations of his great path training, causing his progress to backslide. Such abilities to forcibly enhance one's powers came with terrifying side effects after all. However, there was no way he could escape using it. That battle at the Crimson River was a fight to the death. Not even the ninth servant would be able to cover him anymore. If he refused to use such powers, he would only end up dead. Yi Futian continued to look unfazed as he listened to Xingkai talk. He glanced at the tall, mighty form and said plainly, "A general of a losing army is all air and no substance. Burn yourself all you want. You'll end up dead today all the same." The world tree within his life palace swayed as beams of dazzling light coursed over his body, casting holy light all over the place. His world tree resonated with the powers of the deed of thorough comprehension, glowing with a ring of light that was even more brilliant. The beam of light shot to the peak of the river. The great path of the world around them seemed to meld with the beam, transmuting into a single will of the great path. His body was akin to a furnace of the great path, incorporating the great paths of everything in the world. Boom! The vast space around him turned into a world of stars. Countless stars circled and orbited around him as all the lights flowed onto Yi Futian's body. Under the light of the deed of thorough comprehension, his body transformed into its starry battle form. Boom! A tall, mighty form appeared in their surroundings. It seemed to have engulfed the great path of the world around them. The phenomenon was a result of the deed of thorough comprehension and the light of stars of the great path. This is the starry battle form. Some of the elders felt their hearts racing. They recognized it to be a power belonging to the star-plucking saint. The old man who'd snuck into the crowd expressed his approval, astonished that he'd learned how to use something like that in such a short time. Furthermore, the old man also saw that the young man had been able to incorporate his powers into it, expressing the form perfectly. "Your talents are catching up to mine," he mumbled. However, everyone around him was simply too focused on the battle to hear what he'd said. Yi Futian extended his hand, conjuring an extremely huge staff of the stars using the boundless starry powers around him. The staff gleamed with the dazzling light of the stars. Terrifying beams of starlight shot through the clouds. His might did not seem to be inferior to Xingkai's. Boom! Bang! The two massive figures walked forward at the same time, charging at each other. Massive waves crashed in the crimson river beneath them, causing the sky above to shake. Xingkai threw a palm attack out while Yi Futian, who had transformed into the starry battle form, lifted his staff and brought it down. It seemed like stars were being brought down, destroying everything below. Boom! Deafening rumbles were heard as a devastating ring of light swept out. Raging tornadoes swept all over the place. The spectators at the shores all unleashed their powers to withstand the aftershock. Both men seemed to have backed away at almost the same time. Yet Yi Futian continued to lift his staff and move forward. His staff swooped around in the air as he brought it down yet again. Boom! 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 One strike after another from the staff brought the world around them to the verge of collapse. Xingkai roared furiously. He then lifted his arm and threw countless palm attacks, engulfing the sky before him. However, Yi Futian, who was moving forward, swung his staff around and struck again. The stars around him fell and merged with the staff. The palm attack of the great path crumbled in a frenzy. He brought down the starry staff with great force. Boom, boom, boom. Earth-shattering rumbles were heard as Xingkai's arm gradually shattered. His body was sent flying away under the relentless attacks of the staff. He then spat a great amount of blood. However, Yi Futian had no intention of stopping. He stepped out yet again, lashing out with his staff, and bringing it down hard on Xingkai's chest. Yet another rumble was heard. Xingkai's massive body continued to break and crumble. His bones were broken, and his meridians crumbled. Xingkai had paid an extremely great price by taking the heaven-punishing battle form. That, coupled with the extent of the damage being suffered at the moment, made it so that his injuries were irreversible. Even if he were to survive the battle, he would undoubtedly be disabled. What the hell? The hearts of the spectators continued to race. This fight was utterly crazy. Xingkai had taken the heaven-punishing battle form, yet he'd lost all the same. Futian lifted the staff again. If the next strike hit its intended target, Xingkai would be finished right there and then. Stop! A stifled voice was heard, shaking their surroundings and causing even Futian to slow down. If he dies, Qingye City will be no more. A threateningly cold voice was heard. While the ninth servant had not interfered right away, he now took to threatening Futian using Qingye City. Think you could do so? A cold voice responded. The staff was then brought down right onto Xingkai's head. Everyone eyed that scene, watching the weapon being brought down without the slightest hint of hesitation. It was as if time had slowed down. Boom! The starry staff came down. A low rumble was heard. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.